Opening the center with this pawn thrust immediately contests crucial central squares and prepares piece development. Developing the knight to its most active square, this move immediately prepares for central pawn challenges and flexible piece deployment. Securing central space and preparing for an impending queenside expansion. This solidifies black's pawn structure, preparing to develop the king's bishop to a more active square, potentially challenging white's central space. Developing the knight solidifies the center's influence, preparing for queenside expansion and a flexible pawn structure. Unleashing central pressure, black immediately contests white's ambitions and opens diagonals for piece activity. Sacrificing pawn structure for open lines, white immediately seeks initiative and active piece play in the center. Recapturing the pawn immediately frees black's light-squared bishop and opens a central diagonal. Sacrificing the queen now forces a favorable endgame by stripping away black's central pawn structure and opening lines for white's pieces. King's safety is now a premium, as the black monarch steps into the open, but this forces development for the remaining minor pieces. Developing the knight now frees the dark-squared bishop and prepares for king's safety, while black's king remains exposed in the center. Solidifying central presence while preparing development, this knight strategically supports a future pawn push or knight maneuver. Sharpening the pressure on the knight, this development subtly aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and prepare for future queenside expansion. Challenging the bishop immediately, this pawn push seeks to gain space and perhaps disrupt white's coordination on the queenside. Disrupting black's pawn structure, this exchange clears lines for white's pieces and prepares a queenside advantage. Doubling pawns on the f-file creates a structural weakness, but opens the g-file for potential kingside play later. Reinforcing the kingside pawn structure now aims to secure this flank and prepare for a more active bishop development. Solidifying the pawn chain grants a touch more central influence, but sacrifices pawn structure for future development. Developing the bishop to an active diagonal while preparing for kingside pawn expansion is a sensible plan here. Unlocking the c8 bishop and creating tactical chances on the queenside by centralizing the knight. Clearing the king's path opens up the g-file, and a sudden castling maneuver injects immediate dynamism into the game. This move tucks the king away, aiming to connect the rooks and solidify black's defense against the open files, though it does leave the bishop pair with white. Sacrificing the bishop here opens up the c-file for your rook and aims to exploit black's exposed king. Rescuing the rook from its exposed position immediately sets up potential counterplay along the open c-file. Consolidating the queenside pawns and securing the c-file are the priorities now. Escorting the monarch to the center, though it invites further pressure along the open files. Bringing the rook to the third rank prepares to challenge black's weakened kingside and control the crucial central files. Solidifying the rook's presence on the seventh rank, this repositioning aims to bolster defense and potentially prepare for future central activity. Centralizing the rook immediately seizes the open d-file, pressuring black's disorganized structure and preparing to exploit any weaknesses. Centralizing the rook aims to contest the crucial d-file and potentially pressure white's isolated pawn. Shifting the monarch to safety is paramount, clearing the way for central pawn advances and consolidating pressure along the d-file. Focusing development on the queenside with the bishop aims to activate pieces and prepare for a potential queenside pawn push. Exchanging the rook simplifies into a pawn structure imbalance, potentially favoring white's queenside majority in the long run. Reclaiming material and solidifying the pawn structure, this maneuver aims to centralize the knight and prepare for future piece activity, despite the doubled pawns. Knight maneuvers to a more active diagonal, seeking to pressure black's pawn structure and exploit king's exposed position. Securing the vital c-file with the rook presents a clear objective, aiming to contest white's control and prepare for future exchanges. Asserting dominance on the f5 square, this knight aims to disrupt black's weak pawn structure and support a potential kingside attack. Unshackling the bishop from its passive defensive role, this move finally activates its diagonal reach towards white's kingside weakness. Pushing the g-pawn to g4 aims to restrict black's knight and seize more central territory. Challenging white's central space and aiming to activate the queenside, black boldly injects activity into this unfolding positional struggle. Striking at the heart of black's pawn structure, this capture opens a critical diagonal for white's queenside pieces. Reclaiming territory on the queenside, this pawn thrust aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and create dynamic counterplay. Securing the monarch's safety becomes paramount, clearing a path for the rook's active deployment across the queenside. Opening the queenside for the rook and potentially creating a passed pawn later on the file. A calculated risk, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and create outpost opportunities. Relinquishing the central file to white's rooks makes defending the queenside pawns a desperate struggle. Attempting to destabilize black's pawn chain, this move opens diagonals for future activity. Pushing a pawn further aims to disrupt white's queenside control and gain vital space. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure aims to prevent black from creating play with their pawn. Pushing this pawn aggressively challenges white's central pawn structure, aiming to create dynamic counterplay on the queenside. Bolstering the queenside pawn structure aims to prevent a queenside breakthrough, though it does cede initiative to black's centralized pieces. The knight makes a valiant attempt to penetrate the kingside defense, seeking to disrupt white's pawn structure and create outpost opportunities. Liberating the knight to harass the kingside pawns, a subtle psychological probe aiming for weaknesses.